Hey there, so today I'm sitting here at my pool equipment pad. We've got a faulty actuator here. This thing just keeps spinning around. It'll block off flow from the pump as it spins. So this actuator here is what I use to control flow up to our solar heater on the roof. So I've repaired this actuator multiple times before. I'm gonna go ahead and show you what I think the problem is, and hopefully it helps you if you run into a similar issue. This is a 24 volt actuator here. This is made by Torque. I've actually replaced my older John D actuator previously that finally gave way, but I've had this one installed for a few years now. Fortunately, most of these 24 volt pool valve actuators have similar internal components and can be repaired similar. So we're gonna go ahead and open this thing up here in a second. Right now I've got our equipment turned off here. I've still got power going to the actuator, but I have a little toggle switch that I have in the off position there. And most of these actuators have similar switches, but this valve right now is showing that it's in the closed position going to the return on the pool. And so right now I'm sending water from the filter up to the solar heater on our house, and then it comes back through the return back to the pool there. But again, I've got the pump off, so no water is actually running through this, but I can still turn this actuator on and demonstrate the issue that I'm seeing. So right now, this valve should not be rotating this far. I've got the stops in the actuator set to stop right here and right up here, and it should just essentially actuate back and forth. Right now, this thing is just going to continue to rotate in a circle. And if I had the pump running right now, we would be blocking off flow and essentially deadheading everything, causing lots of noise and then a big spike in the pressure. And then essentially that pressure would relieve as this valve starts to rotate towards our solar heater supply line. So that's just going to keep spinning until I turn it off. So essentially I've been having to operate this in manual mode, and all that automation is controlled through this Pentair Solar Touch panel, and that's where the valve is wired to, the 24 volts. We've got a line here that runs all the way to the valve here, so that's where it's getting its power from. So this controller here is really what's telling the valve when to actuate, when to send water up to the roof, and when to turn off and bypass the solar heater. Here's a closer look at the valve. We've got still our old John D handle that I've transferred over to this actuator here. So this actuator is installed on a John D valve, so that just kind of shows how compatible a lot of these actuators are with the different valves out there. So I unscrew the handle there, and we've got essentially these 4 screws that hold together the housing of the actuator, and that's what we're gonna go ahead and open up. So we've got just 4 Phillips head screws here. And there we go. There's the inside of the actuator. So I've repaired these 24 volt actuators about a half a dozen times, and in all but one instance, the issue lies with either these cams here, kind of that blue plastic, or these little micro switches that sit off to the side. There's 2 of them, one here and one here. And how this works is there's these little protrusions or knobs that stick out of, let's call them the cams. And so we've got one there, and then, maybe hard to see, but then we've got another one down here. And so these switches, you can see they're at different elevations. We've got the upper one, the lower one. So this upper blue portion is what functions with the upper switch, and then the lower knob functions with the lower switch. So as those knobs rotate around and make contact with these switches, they push them in and sending the signal that contact is made, the valve is at the proper position. So this is even when we first installed the actuator, we set these cams up here so that we can determine the stop point. So the stop points for our valve here are pretty much on a 90-degree angle. We've got a stop point here blocking off supply to the pool returns, and then we've got a stop point here on the supply to the solar heater. So At any given point, we'd want one of those lines open and one closed. That always allows flow coming from the filter to either the heater or directly back to the pool. So really just a 90-degree operation of this actuator is what we're looking for. So I'm gonna go ahead and turn this valve back on so it's under automated control. Turn the toggle on. I'm just gonna watch this and see what's happening here. We've got that knob that should be contacting our upper switch and it's just going right by it. So it's not making good contact with that switch. Let's look at the bottom one here. The bottom one is making contact, but the top one also needs to make contact to stop. If I go ahead and reverse our toggle switch so that we're going in the reverse direction, let's watch. So that bottom one is making contact. So when we've got this switch, this toggle switch, it's essentially a three-way switch. There's like direction 1, direction 2, and off. So when we have this reverse direction here, we're operating based off the lower cam switch there. And turn the switch back to the normal position. Our solar controller is saying, let's turn this valve on, let's start heating that water. And this is where that upper switch should be telling it to stop, which actually right there, it did stop, which is good. So I think what I'm seeing here is this valve stem is pretty loose right now, kind of pretty wobbly. So right now we're just kind of playing with the positions on here, toggling up and down, making sure our stop points are at the correct position where we want them. So when the solar heater's off, it should stop right there at the direction of the solar line. And then when the solar heater is on, it should stop right here so that we no longer have flow going back to the pool. So it is stopping now. And I think really what I'm seeing, without even having to really do any adjustments, is this valve stem was a bit loose. I think somehow it had kind of gotten pulled up, but after pressing it down, it's not moving. It looks like it's in a much better position here. So fortunately, this was an easy fix this time. Otherwise, what we normally end up doing is having to loosen this little ring nut on the top of those cams and just kind of rotate the cams and play around with the positions until we get our stop points set up where we want them to be. And then the other components, like I said, these little micro switches here, those are super easy to replace. I ended up buying a bag of them on Amazon for a few bucks, and when the time comes, if these ever fail, we just go ahead, take off those 2 Phillips screws, disconnect these wires, pop the new one in, and it's as easy as that. So really, to test the micro switches, all you have to do is depress or press in those metal tabs on each one and make sure the actuator stops. So I'm gonna go ahead and just pop our cover back on here with those 4 Phillips screws. And then we're gonna test it again just to make sure that that stem is still okay. Alright, I'm gonna hit our toggle switch and try to turn our heater off. Okay, we're off. That worked. Now we're gonna put it back to essentially what we consider our normal mode here. And so again, our solar controller, it's warm enough out today where our solar heater should be on. There we go, it's stopping pretty good now. So in this case, I kind of lucked out. I didn't even have to adjust the cams. It really ended up being that shaft. I just had to press it down a little bit more. It had a lot of wobble to it there. So this was just one scenario in which these valves can kind of come out of adjustment and how you can pop it back into place. Otherwise, in most other instances, it's either replacing those micro switches or adjusting the cams themselves so they have the proper stop position. All right, just turn the pool back on here. We got the actuator functional. So we're we're gonna start sending that water up from our solar heater back down. You can see it flowing through our check valve there. It's gonna start coming back through the pool. We'll get the bubbles worked out of the system, and we are back in business. And what's great is I no longer have to babysit this valve for when the weather's warm or cold. We'll let our controller do the work and control this valve for us. Hopefully you find this video helpful, and if so, feel free to like and subscribe.